Well, I do understand that. So yesterday I got a homemade haircut. What do you guys think?
Love it.
Ah, great. Barbara's in the room. She doesn't want to be seen, but she heard that. All right. Does anybody, before we begin, does anybody have any updates or questions, or is everybody able to get on the blogs okay and things are working?
Yep.
All right. So somebody refresh us. What's the last thing that we talked about yesterday? What's Montag up to?
They're planning on like planting books into like the firemen's homes and like to set them on fire.
Exactly. So they're going to start to frame the firemen is
Yeah.
what I think is going to happen next. And I was kind of interested in this because, and today when you look at the blog, you'll see that the journal topic you can also use as your post. And it wasn't purely because I was feeling lazy and didn't want to do two different prompts. It was because as I thought about it, right now, if you watch the news, you get all of these impressions, not just about what's happening, but who's doing the talking, who you can trust, how people feel about things. And there's a lot of subjectivity. People disagree on things based on evidence that really people don't share in common. It's not like doing science where you can see if there's a certain number of milliliters and agreement on measurement. So I was thinking about what Faber said yesterday and how, if you remember, he said that a lot of people around the world look at Americans and see that Americans have so much and they're not working very hard. And a lot of people can go back and forth about whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. But when I first wrote the journal topic, I actually wrote it for a class that happened to be meeting on December 7th. Does anyone know what December 7th is in history? What the anniversary is?
Pearl Harbor?
Ding, you're right. So now you can tell Ms. Hennings that you actually did some review for history. But the thing about Pearl Harbor and the thing about things like 9/11 are there's no question that people felt something that led them to do really horrible things. I mean, not only did people cause a lot of death and destruction, but Pearl Harbor involved a lot of kamikaze pilots. Does anyone know what a kamikaze is?
So like they're like a plane and then they just crash into something.
Suicide plane flyers.
Yeah. And I never really thought about it this way, but that's one thing that Pearl Harbor and 9/11 both had in common. The worst attacks on this country were carried out by people who, rightly or wrongly, whether you disagree or not, they cared so much that they were willing to literally give their life for the cause. Now that gets interesting to me because Montag knows that if he and Faber carry out this plan, he's probably not going to live through it. That woman who burned up with her books cared enough about that to give her life. So what does that tell you about Montag's mindset at this point in the book?
I feel like that kind of like shows like he went from like being like another part of society, just like a robot, to like actually having compassion and like caring and curiosity for books.
Yeah.
And for like humanity.
Yeah. Good point, Deanna. Anybody else? So in the beginning, he was willing to burn stuff without really even giving it a second thought. And now he cares so much that he's so disturbed by the woman who burned with her books that he's actually prepared to give his own life. So let's see what he and Faber come up with. The old man nodded. Those who don't build must burn. And good point in the chat, Ray. And by the way, as a reminder, feel free to use the chat both to talk to each other or to the group, because this is a great way to fill in without disrupting the book. It's as old as history and juvenile delinquents. So that's what I am. And I want to repeat what he said. Those who don't build must burn. It's really easy to criticize, right? If we look at school or if we look at our government or our institutions, it's really easy to point at something and go, that sucks. The president happens to be really good at that. He gives himself a lot of practice in criticizing other people. It's harder to actually build something that serves or that helps people. And so The old man goes on to say, there's some of it in all of us. Montag moved toward the toward the front door. Can you help me in any way tonight with the fire, Captain? I need an umbrella to keep off the rain. I'm so damned afraid I'll drown if he gets me again. The old man said nothing, but glanced once more, nervously, at his bedroom. Montag caught the glance. Well? The old man took a deep breath, held it, and let it out. He took another, eyes closed, his mouth tight, and at last exhaled. Montag, the old man turned at last and said, come along. I would have actually let you walk right out of my house. I am a cowardly old fool. Faber opened the bedroom door and led Montag into a small chamber where a table stood with a number of metal tools, and it lay among a welter of microscopic wire hairs, tiny coils, bobbins, and crystals. What's this? Asked Montag. Proof of my terrible cowardice. I've lived alone so many years, throwing images on walls with my imagination. Fiddling with electronics, radio transmission has been my hobby. My cowardice is of such a passion, complementing the revolutionary spirit that lives in its shadow, I was forced to design this. He picked up a small green metal object no larger than a .22 caliber bullet. I paid for all this. How? Playing the stock market, of course, the last refuge in the world for the dangerous intellectual out of a job. Well, I played the market and built all this, and I've waited. I've waited, trembling, half a lifetime for someone to speak to me. I dared speak to no one. That day in the park when we sat together, I knew that someday you might drop by. With fire or friendship, it was hard to guess. I've had this little item ready for months, but I almost let you go. I am that afraid. It looks like a seashell radio. And something more, it listens. If you put it in your ear, Montag, I can sit comfortably home, warming my frightened bones, and hear and analyze the fireman's world, find its weaknesses without danger. I'm the queen bee, safe in the hive. You will be the drone, the traveling ear. Eventually, I could put out ears into all parts of the city with various men, listening and evaluating. If the drones die, I'm still safe at home, tending my fright with a maximum of comfort and a minimum of chance. See how safe I play it? How contemptible I am? Does anyone know what contemptible means?
Isn't like contempt like to be satisfied? Like that part alone? Is that what that means? 'Cause I've
Oh,
heard the
you're
word.
so close. You know what? I'm going to put both words in the chat because I think what you're describing, Deanna, is content. Oops. It would help if I could type.
Isn't it like being like despicable or something like that?
Yes, Lily, you're right. So in the chat, I put content with an N. That means satisfied. Contempt, that means actually disgust and hate kind of wrapped up into one. And then the question becomes, so if Faber's trying to do the right thing for the right reasons, why does he consider himself contemptible?
Because he's too scared to do anything like about like.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. So Montag is willing to go be on the front lines and be the soldier who actually plants the books and even burns the firemen's houses or frames them. Faber, on the other hand, has good ideas, but he's in his home. He's creating valuable tools, right? Because he's going to be able to give Montag an earbud that not only plays the radio, but that they can also talk into like a microphone, like our earbuds with little mic pieces on them. In fact, Ray Bradbury kind of invented the Airbud way before people thought of it. But Faber doesn't really see himself as a warrior who's going to go out and be physical like Montag. And so he kind of holds himself cheap. And if anybody's ever read Hamlet, Hamlet goes through a moment just like that one in his story. Montag placed the green bullet in his ear. The old man inserted a similar object in his own ear and moved his lips. Montag, the voice was in Montag's head. I hear you, which you got to remember when this book was written seemed like a miracle. It was total science fiction. The old man laughed. You're coming over fine too, Faber whispered, but the voice in Montag's head was clear. Go to the firehouse when it's time. I'll be with you. Let's listen to this Captain Beatty together. He could be one of us. God knows. I'll give you things to say. We'll give him a good show. Do you hate me for this electronic cowardice of mine? And here he goes. Here I am, sending you out into the night while I stay behind the lines with my damned ears listening for you to get your head chopped off. We all do what we do, said Montag. He put the Bible in the old man's hands. Here, I'll chance turning into a substitute tomorrow. I'll see the unemployed printer. Yes, that much I can do. Good night, Professor. Not good night. I'll be with you the rest of the night. A vinegar gnat tickling your ear when you need me. But good night and good luck anyway. The door opened and shut. Montag was in the dark street again, looking at the world. You could feel the war getting ready from the sky that night. The way the clouds moved aside and came back, and the way the stars looked. A million of them swimming between the clouds, like the enemy discs, and the feeling that the sky might fall upon the city and turn it to chalk dust, and the moon go up in fire red. That was how the night felt. Montag walked up from the subway with the money in his pocket. He had visited the bank, which was open all night, every night, with robot tellers in attendance. Now, again, there were no ATMs back then. That did not exist. And as he walked, he was listening to the seashell radio in one ear. We have mobilized 1 million men. Quick victory is ours if the war comes. Music flooded over the voice quickly, and it was gone. 10 million men mobilized. Faber's voice whispered in his other ear. But say 1 million, it's happier. So Faber was suspecting that they were not getting the truth from the news broadcast and that the news was actually darker than what they were being told. Faber, yes, I'm not thinking. I'm just doing like I'm told, like always. You said get the money, and I got it. I didn't really think of it myself. When do I start working things out on my own? You've started already by saying what you just said. You'll have to take me on faith. I took the others on faith. Yes, and look where we're headed. You'll have to travel blind for a while. Here's my arm to hold on to. Now, I want to say a couple things about that because Faber, we just talked about, is feeling like he's not quite as courageous as Montag, right? Because he doesn't have Montag's physical strength and he's not actually at risk of being hurt. Montag, though, actually holds himself to account and feels insecure because he's not as wise as Faber and he doesn't think as well. And so he's kind of feeling like, I'm just doing what I always do and I don't think much of myself. So they're both criticizing themselves, even though their skills are complementary. One has what the other doesn't. Montag felt his feet moving him on the sidewalk toward his house. Keep talking. Would you like me to read? I'll read so you can remember. I go to bed only 5 hours a night, nothing to do. So if you like, I'll read you to sleep nights. They say you retain knowledge even when you're sleeping, if someone whispers it in your ear. Yes, here. Far away across town in the night, the faintest whisper of a turned page, the book of Job. The moon rose in the sky as Montag walked, his lips moving just a trifle. So on the course blogs, there's a poll, and we talked about having younger siblings join us for, obviously not this story, but having another story. There's a real comfort in reading. And part of the reason I decided to do our class this way on Zoom is that there's a connection when people share story. So if you haven't seen the course blog poll yet, go ahead and take a look at that. And if you're interested, great. And if you're not, totally fine. He was eating a light supper at 9 p.m. when the front door cried out in the hall, and Mildred ran from the parlor like a native fleeing an eruption of Vesuvius. Now that's an illusion. What's Vesuvius? Does anyone know? Anyone ever hear of Pompeii?
Oh, the volcano like eruption?
Yeah, exactly. So Mildred runs up like she's running away from hot lava. Mrs. Phelps and Mrs. Bowles came through the front door and vanished into the volcano's mouth with martinis in their hands. Montag stopped eating. They were like a monstrous crystal chandelier tinkling in 1,000 chimes. He saw their Cheshire cat smiles burning through the walls of the house, and now they were screaming at each other above the din. Montag found himself at the parlor door with his food still in his mouth. Doesn't everyone look nice? Nice. You look fine, Millie. Fine. Everyone looks swell. Swell. Montag stood watching them. Patience, whispered Faber. I shouldn't be here, whispered Montag almost to himself. I should be on my way back to you with the money. Tomorrow's time enough. Careful. Isn't this show wonderful? Cried Mildred. Wonderful. On one wall, a woman smiled and drank orange juice simultaneously. How does she do both at once, thought Montag, insanely. In the other walls, an X-ray of the same woman revealed the contracting journey of the refreshing beverage on its way to her delighted stomach. Abruptly, the room took off on a rocket flight into the clouds. It plunged into a lime green sea where blue fish ate red and yellow fish. A minute later, 3 white cartoon clowns chopped off each other's limbs to the accompaniment of immense incoming tides of laughter. 2 minutes more, and the room whipped out of town to the jet cars wildly circling an arena, bashing and backing up and bashing each other again. Montag saw a number of bodies fly in the air. Millie, did you see that? I saw it. I saw it. Montag reached inside the parlor wall and pulled the main switch. The images drained away, as if the water had been let from a gigantic crystal bowl of hysterical fish. The 3 women turned slowly and with unconcealed irritation and then dislike at Montag. When do you suppose the war will start? He said. I notice your husbands aren't here tonight. Oh, they come and go, said Mrs. Phelps. In again, out again, Finnegan. The army called Pete yesterday. He'll be back next week. The army said so. Quick war. 48 hours, they said, and everyone home. That's what the army said. Quick war. Pete was called yesterday, and they said he'd be back next week. Quick. The 3 women fidgeted and looked nervously at the empty mud-colored walls. I'm not worried, said Mrs. Phelps. I'll let Pete do all the worrying. She giggled. I'll let old Pete do all the worrying. Not me. I'm not worried. Yes, said Millie. Let old Pete do the worrying. It's always someone else's husband dies, they say. I've heard that too. I've never known any dead man killed in a war. Killed jumping off buildings, yes, like Gloria's husband last week. But from wars? No. Not from wars, said Mrs. Phelps. Anyway, Pete and I always said no tears, nothing like that. It's our 3rd marriage each, and we're independent. Be independent, we always said. He said, if I get killed off, you just go right ahead and don't cry, but get married again and don't think of me. Are you getting a sense, what does this conversation say about how these people value life and love?
They don't seem to value it that much at all.
Yeah, they don't really seem to be vulnerable to the intensity of feeling that might actually like really make them happy or maybe really make them sad.
Mr. Preston, wait, I have a quick question.
Sure.
You know how like when it was like quick war, like she was like, it was like repeating over and over again? Was that like in Montag's head, like repeating it, or was she actually like saying it over and over and over?
Oh, thank you, Deanna. That's a great question. So let me go back because I want to show you the dialogue on the page. And this is where reading can really make a difference. Can you see that okay?
Yeah.
So what's happening here is that one person is saying, oh, you look swell, and somebody else is saying swell.
Okay. It's because it looks different on my end where the course blog.
Okay, yeah. And that one I just copied and pasted, so some of the formatting didn't really come through. With some of Ray Bradbury's sentences, it's a run-on sentence because it all happens in someone's head. In other cases, we actually see it between people because they're not thinking at all, they're just repeating. So thanks for that. I'm glad you asked. Now I gotta find my place again here. Let's see. That reminds me, said Mildred. Did you see that Clara Dove 5-minute romance last night in your wall? Well, it was all about this woman who, Montag said nothing, but stood looking at the women's faces. And I'm going to pause. Deanna, I'm so glad that you're following along with the written word. And if anybody else needs to know where to find that, if it's not easy for you on the course blog, let me know and I'll send you a link. Montag said nothing, but stood looking at the women's faces, just like he had once looked at the faces of saints in a strange church he had entered when he was a child. The faces of those enameled creatures meant nothing to him, though he talked to them and stood in that church for a long time, trying to be of that religion, trying to know what the religion was, trying to get enough of the raw incense and special dust of the place into his lungs, and thus into his blood, to feel touched and concerned by the meaning of the colorful men and women with the porcelain eyes and the blood ruby lips. But there was nothing, nothing. It was a stroll through another store, and his currency strange and unusable there, and his passion cold, even when he touched the wood and plaster and clay. So it was now, in his own parlor, with these women twisting in their chairs under his gaze, lighting cigarettes, blowing smoke, touching their sun-fired hair and examining their blazing fingernails as if they had caught fire from his look. Their faces grew haunted with silence. They leaned forward at the sound of Montag swallowing his final bite of food. They listened to his feverish breathing. The three empty walls of the room were like the pale brows of sleeping giants now, empty of dreams. Montag felt that if you touched these three staring brows, that you would feel a fine salt sweat on your fingertips. The perspiration gathered with the silence, and the sub-audible trembling abound and around, and in the women who were burning with tension. Any moment, they might hiss a long sputtering hiss and explode. Montag moved his lips. Let's talk. This has to be an unbearable amount of tension for these women, because can you imagine? They're used to saying nothing. Oh, you look swell, swell, and just looking at all the entertainment. But now this quiet in the room is getting so intense, it's almost like their heads are going to pop off. And then on top of it, Montag wants to talk? The women jerked and stared. How are your children, Mrs. Phelps? He asked. You know I haven't any. No one in his right mind, the good Lord knows, would have children, said Mrs. Phelps, not quite sure why she was angry with this man. I wouldn't say that, said Mrs. Bowles. I've had 2 children by cesarean section. No use going through all that agony for a baby. The world must reproduce, you know, the race must go on. Besides, they sometimes look just like you, and that's nice. 2 cesareans turn the trick, yes, sir. Oh, my doctor said cesareans aren't necessary. You've got the hips for it. Everything's normal, but I insisted. Cesareans or not, children are ruinous. You're out of your mind, said Mrs. Phelps. I plunk the children in school 9 days out of 10. I put up with them when they come home 3 days a month. It's not bad at all. You heave them into the parlor and turn the switch. It's like washing clothes. Stuff laundry in and slam the lid. Mrs. Bowles tittered. They'd just as soon kick as kiss me. Thank God I can kick back. Wow. Any reactions to that?
That's so sad.
No kidding. And I just saw your comment, Ray. No, they don't value their children. In fact, they're like appliances. They're just things like you plunk them in front of the screens and leave. Now, the scary thing for me is you and I both know people whose approach to parenting is wonderful, conscientious, loving. We also know people whose parents are not quite so connected with their kids. And some of that I hear in this. The women showed their tongues laughing. Mildred sat a moment and then, seeing that Montag was still in the doorway, clapped her hands. Let's talk politics to please Guy. Sounds fine, said Mrs. Bowles. I voted last election, same as everyone, and I laid it on the line for President Noble. I think he's one of the nicest looking men ever became president, as though that matters. Oh, but the man they ran against him, he wasn't much, was he? Kind of small and homely, and he didn't shave too close or comb his hair very well. What possessed the outs to run him? You don't just go running a little short man like that against a tall man. Besides, he mumbled. Half the time I couldn't hear a word he said. And the words I did hear, I didn't understand. Fat too, and didn't dress to hide it. No wonder the landslide was for Winston Noble. Even their names helped. Compare Winston Noble to Hubert Hoag for 10 seconds, and you can almost figure the results. Damn it, cried Montag. What do you know about Hoag and Noble? Why, they were right in that parlor wall not 6 months ago. One was always picking his nose. It drove me wild. Now I'm going to pause there and give us a chance to think a little bit. When people pick presidents in this country, what are they basing their decisions on?
What they wanted. Oh, go, Mikey. Okay. So like basically like what they want to do for like the country, and like depending on if they're like oh, this person's a socialist or something, and like are just basically off of that.
Well, yeah. And if you look in the chat, Ray asked the question here, they only judge their political leader based on physical attributes. Sometimes it's the name, sometimes it's the physical attribute that they're talking about. But what you're not hearing anything about is what the leader actually stands for. What will he do? What are his qualifications for the job? None of that's in this conversation, in the dialogue. And sometimes we don't really even hear about those things in our actual elections in real life because somebody is hijacking things with a scandal or a quote or a gotcha moment. I'm going to follow this a little bit tomorrow. I'm not going to add to the post for today. But as we get closer to the presidential election in this country in real life, it's going to be interesting to consider some of these things that Ray Bradbury predicted from the book. Before we break for the day, does anybody have any comments or questions?
I was gonna add something for about like being later. Doesn't like the president also need to have the qualifications for representing the country that he's going to run for with against like other worlds and stuff?
Mm-hmm. It was a great follow-up to the question. Lena, I didn't hear the first part because the transmission broke up. Can you repeat yourself one more time?
Oh, I was basically saying that what qualifications he will have just like for the country, because he's representing the country. So if it's basically like if a state saw you that you're not running and they saw you as like not being a very good leader, they would probably assume that the country that the president is like leading isn't a good country.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you're raising a really important point. And, you know, I'm recording this and posting it on the internet. And as a public school teacher, as you know, I can't possibly have an opinion about the current president or whether it's good or bad. Unrelated hair caught in my throat. Sorry about that. But I will say that when you're electing someone, it's kind of like bringing in a plumber to fix your pipes in your house.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want someone to come in and just point at the pipes and say, hey, that stinks. I mean, you already know that, or you wouldn't have called a plumber. I think you probably want to have somebody there who knows how to repair things so that you can help.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
And I also think like if we were to have a new president, not like Donald Trump or something, because right when he got into office, he was having these meetings with other states, and you can tell like these other states did not like him. And what if a new state came in and didn't even like know about like US or anything? They probably would have thought that because of their leader, they probably would think that this country's like bad and stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I agree. All right. Well, to be continued. Tomorrow we solve the worlds of, or the problems of politics in the world. Today, I hope everybody stays well and has a great afternoon. And if you need me, send me an email. Any parting shots?
Don't procrastinate heaven.
Yes, don't procrastinate on any stuff. For that matter, if you know somebody in the AP class, tell them to write those essays already because we got stuff to do on Friday ourselves too.
All right.
Not to pile on or anything. All right. Have a great day, everybody. I'll see you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 Bye.